What if the loudest scream in rock finally fell silent? On July 22, 2025, the world stopped to mourn Ozzy Osbourne, a man whose very existence was an act of defiance against pain, silence, and fate itself. The Prince of Darkness, who once confessed, "The past 4 years have been sheer hell," finally faced the one battle he couldn't win. But this isn't just a story of loss. It's a revelation, one so raw and haunting, it leaves an echo long after the final note fades. Before we unravel the shadows, show your respect with a like for the legend who gave us everything and left behind a silence more powerful than any scream. Roots of Darkness. Silence wasn't just a part of Ozzy Osbourne's childhood. It was his shield, his prison, and sometimes his only companion. In the rain-stained slums of Aston, Birmingham, young John Michael Osbourne lived in a cramped house so cold the walls seemed to shiver. 6 children, 2 parents worn down by endless labor, and not a drop of softness in sight. His father, a factory worker, saw emotion as weakness. His mother, drained by the assembly line, had little left to give. At school, Ozzy's battles only grew crueler. Letters turned to puzzles, numbers twisted into torment, his dyslexia dismissed as stupidity, his confusion greeted by mockery. The bullying was merciless, fists and words leaving scars that no one noticed. When he came home in tears, his father's response wasn't comfort, but punishment, a belt for weakness, a lesson in pain. The silence grew heavier until it was suffocating. By 14, he couldn't take it any longer. In a dim bedroom, with his mother's washing line in hand, he stood on a chair, ready to off himself. Fate intervened with violence instead of mercy. His father stormed in, yanked him down, and beat him again, as if pain could beat out despair. Something inside Ozzy hardened that day. He stopped trying, stopped talking, stopped caring. The world faded to gray, and he drifted through adolescence as a ghost in his own life. But even then, destiny was only just getting started with him. Jailhouse rebellion. Desperation doesn't whisper, it screams. At 17, with no future and hunger gnawing through the soles of his worn-out shoes, Ozzy's search for escape led him straight into the cold steel of a prison cell. A botched burglary landed him behind the unforgiving walls of Winston Green. Here, reality hit like a fist. One violent encounter left him swinging a metal chamber pot in raw survival. But even as hope faded, a single spark refused to die. One day, through the static of a battered prison radio, the Beatles' "She Loves You" crackled to life. Something inside Ozzy ignited, a light he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he didn't want to disappear. He wanted to be heard, to matter, to scream louder than the pain that had defined him. That moment was no less than a rebirth. When he walked out of Winston Green, it wasn't redemption waiting. It was a broken boy with a new vow. He wouldn't vanish into silence. He would force the world to listen. And soon, that defiance would grow into a roar that changed music forever. Sabbath is born. That roar didn't take long to find its echo. By 1968, a modest ad for a vocalist pulled Ozzy into a grim rehearsal room in Birmingham, where 3 other outcasts waited. Tony Iommi, a guitarist with fingers scared by fate; Geezer Butler, a bassist obsessed with the occult; and Bill Ward, a drummer who played like he was wrestling with thunder itself. They called themselves Earth at first, but destiny had a darker name in store. A glance at a cinema marquee, Black Sabbath, and a question: if people pay to be scared, why not give them music that could terrify and move them? What they created wasn't meant to be entertainment. It was exorcism, pain, rage, and grief distorted into sound. On Friday the 13th, 1970, they released their debut. Critics recoiled, calling it satanic, disgusting, unlistenable. But out in the world, the broken and the angry heard something else. A voice screaming the questions nobody dared ask. That same year, Paranoid exploded out of nowhere. War Pigs, Iron Man, the anthems of a generation. Ozzy's voice wasn't polished, but it was real, raw agony with nowhere else to go. He never learned to read music, never took a lesson, but he didn't have to. Every note was forged from survival, every lyric a wound turned into melody. Behind the wild antics and madman persona was the same invisible boy from Aston, now amplified to the point the whole world had to listen. But not every exorcism leaves you free. The more fans cheered, the louder Ozzy's inner chaos became. Fame built the myth, but it couldn't heal the hurt. And as Black Sabbath claimed the world, the shadows inside him only grew longer. Crash, burn, reborn. Glory at the summit rarely means peace below. By the late 70s, Black Sabbath was conquering the world. But inside, Ozzy was unraveling. Years of chaos, numbing habits, and old wounds caught up with him. Missed rehearsals and slurred words piled up, and his bandmates, ruthers and riffs, began to drift away. The final blow came in 1979. Not with confrontation, but with cowardice. Sabbath fired Ozzy through a messenger, not even face to face. His sanctuary was ripped away. The only place chaos made sense was gone. Alone in a Los Angeles hotel, curtains drawn tight, he faded into silence and self-destruction, convinced his story was over. But legends don't vanish, they transform. In the darkest hour, Sharon Arden, daughter of Sabbath's manager, saw a flicker of the man beneath the wreckage. She pulled him from the abyss and told him what he'd forgotten. "You were the magic in that band." Her belief was lightning in a storm. Then came Randy Rhoads, young, focused, his guitar weeping and soaring with otherworldly power. Together, Ozzy and Randy built Blizzard of Oz, not as a celebration but as a battle cry. Crazy Train wasn't just an anthem, it was resurrection. Every riff screamed, "I'm still here. I still matter." The collapse wasn't his end, it was his crucible. With Sharon's fierce loyalty and Randy's unearthly talent, Ozzy didn't just survive. He roared back, stronger, stranger, and determined to prove that even the most broken souls can be reborn. But fate, never done with Ozzy, waited with another test just beyond the spotlight. Tragedy strikes. Just as Ozzy Osbourne began to claw his way out of ruin, fate delivered a blow more vicious than anything before. In the early hours of March 19, 1982, while on tour in Florida, a restless morning turned tragic. A small plane, piloted by the band's bus driver, became a deadly temptation. Randy Rhoads, Ozzy's closest friend, his lifeline, and creative partner, climbed aboard with the makeup artist. What followed was a routine loop in the sky, a moment meant for laughter and thrill. But on the third pass, disaster struck. The plane's wing clipped their tour bus, spiraled, and crashed in a fiery explosion. Randy was gone at just 25, a comet extinguished before his time. Ozzy watched in horror as the flames erased his friend and a piece of his own soul. For days, he was lost in silence, drowning himself in alcohol, unable to eat, unable to speak. The pain was more than grief, it was emotional paralysis, a darkness that hollowed him out. Even Sharon, who'd rescued him once, couldn't break through at first. The shows were canceled, the laughter vanished, and the house filled with a silence heavier than any music he'd ever made. But even in devastation, something in Ozzy refused to die. From the wreckage, he began to write, not to heal, but to remember. Every lyric, every scream on stage became a tribute to the friend he could never forget. His survival became an act of rebellion against loss. Each performance a legacy built in tragedy. He wasn't healed, but he was moving. And for Ozzy Osbourne, simply moving meant he was still alive. But that wasn't the end of the darkness. The years that followed would test him in ways that defied belief. Madness and survival. You'd think losing a soulmate would be the lowest point. But for Ozzy Osbourne, the aftermath was a descent into chaos that made even tragedy seem almost merciful. The 1980s blurred by in a storm of noise, substances, and self-destruction. On stage, he was the mythic madman. Offstage, he was lost, unreachable, and spiraling. Sharon, his anchor, fought to save him, sometimes with love, sometimes with war. The breaking point came in 1989, when Ozzy, shattered by addiction and haunted by loss, nearly destroyed the one person who had kept him alive. A night he could barely remember ended with Sharon hurt and Ozzy arrested, not by police, but by the consequences of his own collapse. Locked away in a psychiatric facility, there were no crowds, no guitars, just a man reduced to whispers, facing everything he had tried to escape. The detox was agony, burning away not just toxins, but every illusion he'd built to survive. Yet even there, Sharon returned, not out of duty, but sheer defiance. "You are still in there. I know it," she told him, igniting a battle for something more precious than fame. The right to keep the love he nearly lost. Step by trembling step, Ozzy crawled back. He wasn't cured, but he was conscious, and that was enough. In 1991, armed with a new sense of clarity and backed by guitarist Zakk Wylde, he released No More Tears. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a reckoning. Songs like Mama, I'm Coming Home weren't radio hits. They were confessions from a broken man learning to rebuild. Each sober morning was a miracle. every concert a small victory. Sharon was no longer just his savior, but his fellow soldier, fighting alongside him. Their marriage, battered and bruised, became a testament to survival itself. But even as he clawed his way back into the light, the shadows were never far behind. The body keeps score, and Ozzy's hardest battles were still to come. The final battles. For most, surviving decades of addiction and tragedy would be enough. But for Ozzy Osbourne, fate kept raising the stakes. The early 2000s brought a different kind of spotlight, this time not from blazing stage lights, but from the everyday chaos of family life. The Osbournes' reality show made him a household name to a new generation, revealing a softer, bewildered side of the Prince of Darkness. Yet, beneath the jokes and TV remotes, his body was quietly crumbling. Years of living on the edge had left him brittle, bones aching, joints stiff, and the specter of pain growing louder. Then, in December 2003, catastrophe struck again. A quad bike accident left Ozzy shattered, collarbone broken, ribs snapped, a crushed neck vertebrae, collapsed lungs. For 8 days he lay silent in a coma, with the world holding its breath. Most would have surrendered, but not Ozzy. Against every prediction, he clawed his way back. By 2004, he stunned everyone by walking onto a stage once more, applause thundering for a man who refused to quit. But the scars ran deeper than any X-ray could reveal. Chronic pain became a daily battle. Still, he kept going, his strength now less a roar and more a stubborn growl. Then, just when it seemed he might have found peace, another twist. In 2019, a simple fall at home dislodged the metal rods in his spine, the very ones meant to hold him together. The agony was indescribable. Soon after, doctors delivered a soul-crushing diagnosis: Parkinson's disease. The man who once commanded arenas now struggled to steady his own hands. Publicly, he confessed, "I can't walk properly these days. I'm just wobbling." The world that had watched him cheat death time and again now saw a different fight, one not against chaos, but against time itself. And yet, even as the illness advanced, Ozzy's spirit refused to surrender. In 2020, he released Ordinary Man, an album haunted by pain but burning with defiance. Every step with a cane was an act of rebellion, every note a refusal to go quietly. Even as surgeries and hospital stays became routine, his voice, though cracked and trembling, carried more power than ever. And in the final act, Ozzy Osbourne, battered by time but unbroken in will, proved that legends don't quit, they outlast. But the last curtain call was waiting, and the world would never forget how he chose to say goodbye. The Last Bow. July 5, 2025 wasn't just a concert. It was a closing prayer for an entire generation. Ozzy Osbourne, supported by the original Black Sabbath lineup, returned to Birmingham, the very city where it all began. Over 40,000 fans packed that arena, and millions more watched online. The crowd fell silent as Ozzy appeared, leaning on a cane, Sharon at his side. His voice cracked with age, his hands shook, but as the first notes rang out, the years seemed to melt away. This was not a spectacle. It was a farewell, trembling with the weight of memory and gratitude. "This may well be the last time I ever stand on a stage," he whispered, his words heavy with both serenity and finality. The curtain didn't crash. It floated down, gentle and dignified, over a career forged in thunder. In a final act of defiance and grace, every dollar from the concert, an astonishing $190 million, was donated to causes that had touched his life. Parkinson's research, children's hospitals, and youth charities. It wasn't just charity, it was a vow that his light would outlast his shadow. Behind the scenes, Ozzy finalized his will not out of fear, but out of respect for what he had survived. His estate, valued at more than $220 million, would be split between Sharon, his 5 children, and carefully structured trusts for his grandchildren. But the true legacy went even further, a vast portion dedicated to mental health, addiction recovery, working-class youth, and animal rescue. Even in his final days, Ozzy's compassion reached further than any scream or riff ever could. Rumors swirled of a secret album, unreleased tracks waiting for the right moment, whispers of a legacy not quite finished. Family debates over his estate and speculation about experimental therapies only fueled the legend. But at the core of it all was one last truth. Ozzy Osbourne had turned his pain into power, his suffering into sanctuary for others. His farewell wasn't loud. It was generous, honest, and deeply human. a reminder that the greatest legends write their own endings. And as the world watched that final bow, it became clear, even as the stage lights faded, his echo would never die. But the story doesn't end there. The silence that followed would reveal what it truly means to be immortal. So what makes a legend last? It isn't just the noise, the headlines, or the chaos left in their wake. It's the silence after, the way their story lingers when the music fades. Ozzy Osbourne's journey was never just about breaking records or shocking crowds. It was about rising from ashes again and again, even when every part of him had reason to give in. From the battered boy in Birmingham to the titan of heavy metal, and finally, to a man who gave his fortune to causes that might save others, Ozzy never stopped fighting for meaning. Even as Parkinson's stole his strength, he turned pain into poetry and loss into legacy. His final bow was not an ending, but an invitation for us to carry that torch forward, to find resilience in our own struggles, to turn every wound into something worth remembering. Legends aren't built in the spotlight. They're proven in the silence that follows, when fans share memories, when children find hope in his lyrics, when the world is just a little brighter because he was here. If you felt any part of this story in your bones, drop a comment below. Share your favorite Ozzy moment, your memory, or simply a thank you. Because that's how the echo survives. When we choose to keep it alive. Rest easy, Ozzy Osbourne. Your scream may have faded, but your echo will never die.